Yo, the name is Alpern, and Relic announced yesterday a hotfix for Company Heroes 3 regarding the balance changes that we saw last week. And this is meant to fix some of the most glaring issues, such as the extreme axis win rates right now. Now, this is just a hotfix preview, so it means that these changes are essentially not set in stone. But they will be taking feedback and perhaps changing some of these things, which is the first time they've done something like this for Company Heroes 3. I think that's very good. I much prefer where they bring something up and then we can discuss the changes before they implement something. I think that's a much better system overall, and I really do like this type of open communication that they're doing. So they do mention here that we can provide feedback, and that's essentially what this video is. We will be going through each line here, and we will discuss whether or not it's good or bad. And I will also suggest some changes that I think needs to happen that aren't like super omega game changing, but just some small tweaks that I really think they should do. So beginning here, the plan changes are Grenadier squad nerf, but mainly for the assault package, not for the general Grenadier performance. So assault package munition cost gets reverted from last patch up to 50, which is, you know, last patch it went from 50 to 45. I don't think this matters whatsoever. It's a very small change. Same here, the research time gets increased ever so slightly. Now, I think this is of course in the right direction. The assault package is massively overperforming. I would like to see it slightly higher. I would have liked to see it maybe 60 munitions to start off, and if it's still too strong, they could probably even do it at 70, just so you get that sort of slower curve where you upgrade your squads instead of all of them getting assault package very quickly. It also makes it a lot more of a strategic decision whether or not you go assault package on all your squads, or if you go 1, 2 and then some mines. And just in general, it would slow down these upgrades. The assault package is, in my opinion, one of the strongest upgrades in the game, so seeing it at only 50 munitions is quite whack, considering Brens and LMGs cost 100 munitions, and the scoped Enfields for the Australians costs 80, for instance. I think this just needs to go up, because a lot of those upgrades don't really change a lot of their matchups. They still win on the same ranges, they still do well, but just slightly better. Meanwhile, the assault package for the Grenadiers actually turns the squad to actually winning a lot of engagements, which they otherwise wouldn't. Not only that, the fact that they also get a free sprint on top of the snare changes in the last patch means you can't really kite this squad once they have this upgrade. So in my opinion, this needs to go up slightly more, but I will also like to see the snare changes from the last patch, where Grenadiers get plus 5 snare range at vet 1 and plus 5 snare range at vet 3. I would like to see those reverted completely. The snare overhaul they did last patch, that, you know, if you get it within the range, the snare will always go off, I think is enough. They don't need that extra 5 or 10 range whatsoever, especially not with the sprint. So in my opinion, I would have definitely liked to see them revert that. I think the snares across the board are fine, unless, you know, this plus 10 range, because you just can't kite it, and it's also extremely difficult for player readability. You know, if you see a Gren, you have to kite it differently than if you see another squad with snares. Not only that, you also need to kite it differently depending on veterancy, and at vet 3 it's essentially impossible to kite it. So I would have really liked to see them remove that snare range buff. Now the next change is for the infantry company office quarters. It goes from 25 to 40 fuel. I think this is not what I would have liked to see. I sort of like the cleanness that all of the office quarters in each tech structure costs the same. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I do think this punishes office quarter upgrades that aren't MP40 Grens, because this is just meant to, you know, account for the increased power level of Grenadiers, but what about every other build that isn't running MP40 Grens? I also think for, in general, facing Grenadiers, this upgrade is totally fine. It is truly the MP40s that puts this, you know, it makes it too strong. So in my opinion, I would have liked them not to change this one, but keep this as is, simply because it's much cleaner. And I think this fuel cost, if it should be applied to anything, should be applied to the verbal, because the verbal with this opening is so fast. You can have it consistently around 9 to 10 minutes, and it's, again, even though it got nerfed last patch, I think getting a anti-infantry medium that is that strong that early is just whack. So in my opinion, put this cost on top of the verbal, that way you slow down that first verbal, and the other options for Wehrmacht will become a lot more attractive if the verbal is a lot more expensive. So weird change here, I'm not a huge fan of it, and yeah, I would have rather see this applied somewhere else, such as on the verbal. Breakthrough. Now this is the ability that increases your capping power. The duration got increased from 45 to 90 last patch, which obviously is insane. It's a 2x multiplier, so putting it at 60 makes a lot more sense, and I think this change is very good. Africa Corps Tiger deployment call-in. So this unit became very prevalent because you could actually reach it quite fast. Considering the tier 3 for DAC got a lot cheaper as well, so rushing Tiger was actually very viable. I'm not so sure if I like this, because I also think the Tiger, you know, it's in such a weird spot because a lot of the factions don't have tank destroyers. So I don't know, maybe for a band-aid fix this is good, but I would still like to see some rather extensive faction overhauls where you actually have heavy counters, not only in the battle groups but within the stock roster of the factions, which they just currently don't. I feel like USF, for instance, how can they stop a Tiger? Well, your only real option is the Hellcat, and the Hellcat has the exact same range as the Tiger and gets completely obliterated. So again, I think this is a bit weird. I really want to see the factions actually having proper counters within their rosters. So it's a decent band-aid fix. I guess it's fine for a hotfix, but I would like to see them do a lot more here. So the Panzerjager squad gets some nerfs as well. Deals less damage to buildings and less damage to destructible ambient objects. What this means is essentially things like green cover and stuff. I don't know how fast they're actually going to be destroying those things now, because, like, say you want to destroy Rex in case your opponent scavenges. In a way, this could be seen as a buff for the espionage battle group, because you actually want to plunder those wrecks. So very interesting change. I don't really care too much about it. Again, I'm not entirely sure why this is a part of a hotfix, because I feel like this unit doesn't really have that many issues right now. Improved bazooka rockets. As this tech is intended to have lower impact than the bars, we wanted a cost that's closer to the intended power level of this technology. I have no opinion here. I think it makes sense either way. I think it's sort of cleaner if both upgrades cost 40, but again, this is fine in my opinion. So the Australian light infantry is getting a rather extensive buff here in terms of their short range. I think this is very strange. They are a light recon squad. I don't know why they should have such high short range damage. Again, this is sort of an issue with the battle groups they've been introducing, where there is some extreme overlaps between the unit options. You saw it again with the Wehrmacht back when they released the coastals. They were extremely, overlapping with the Grenadiers, because they have the same DPS ranges, the same roles, most of it, and it's just sort of weird. Same thing goes here. I guess they just want to sort of push this to be a short range squad, but then again, the flavor doesn't really make sense in my opinion, because it's a light recon squad, right? It should be like the recon squads from CoH3, where it has a massive sight range, but then be a lot weaker in terms of combat performance. So your sections would be your main combat unit, and this would be more like a supplement support unit. So bit of an odd change. I feel like the issue with doing this is, they want it to be more attractive compared to the section, but then you're probably going to end up in a position where either the Australians are always better or the sections are always better. I feel like they should be competing in more of a supportive role, where they support your otherwise normal composition instead of, you know, being a far better option than your opening infantry. So I think the change in question here is fine in general, as I've heard a lot of complaints that this unit isn't very good. But again, I do feel like it sort of phases out the section completely if you pick this battle group. The Archer Tank Destroyer gets 1 CP faster. Again, I'm not really sure why this is part of a hotfix. I feel like the Archer is so strong that it, you know, does it really matter? Again, it's a call-in, so I don't know, with these 2 buffs, can you spam Australians into 2-pounders and then wait for an Archer now? I don't know, it's just weird. Very difficult unit to balance, because if it hits too early it's gonna be too good, and if it hits too late it's gonna probably be too bad. I do think the main thing they're trying to do here is make this unit a bit more viable in team games, because in team games you get command points a lot slower than in 1v1s, because of the longer retreat paths, etc., and the less capping, which gets you less CPs. But again, this is just an issue with call-ins in general and not with this unit specifically. I think call-ins are always going to end up in this position. I've said this before, where they're either too good or too bad. Adding them to the tech roster and using the natural flow of the game with resources is a much better way of implementing these units. And that way it's also consistently good across 1s or 4s, instead of being extremely strong in 1s because you get CPs faster, and then extremely weak in 4s because you get CPs so slow. So I don't know, I think this is weird to be a part of this. I would way rather see this being buildable. And then finally we have a rather massive Bofors emplacement buff here. I'm not a super big fan of this. I think this unit should remain a bit of a meme. I think the super fast, I mean, you get this at 1 CP, right? And that's extremely fast, especially since you also get the 17-pounder. I don't want to see this being strong, so I am a bit worried. I know it's been quite terrible so far in the game, but couldn't it just be like an actual anti-air emplacement instead of being something you just slam every single game on the front line, and then it just sits there until your opponent brings out a counter? I don't know where they want this unit to be. I don't know where their vision is. Like, how do you want this to function? Do you want it to function as the CoH3 Bofors? Is that what you're trying to do here? Again, I think they could have done something a lot more interesting here, where you make this a specific anti-air emplacement instead of being this frontline 360 machine gun that just, you know, forces everything around it until your opponent brings out a counter, and then it gets removed, and then the game continues as normal. I think it's just in such a weird position with all the other emplacements, where they don't really have a vision for how they want them to function in PvP setting. Like in single player or versus AI, I get it. You want to make a sim city and you want it to be somewhat viable to kill the AI, but in a PvP setting, I think these emplacements are just rather dull. But then again, there is a lot of number changes here, and it's extremely difficult to tell how this is actually going to perform in practice with these many changes. So overall, I think some of these changes are really good. Again, I think the most important part with a hotfix like this is to, you know, target the rather annoying stuff that was introduced in the last patch. And a lot of it comes down to the MP40 Grenadiers for Wehrmacht into the fast verbal that just wins the game because it's so cost efficient. Or you have the DAC new Battlefield Espionage battle group, which very often is extremely annoying to face, both in ones and team games. I know the Battlefield Espionage isn't the strongest battle group perhaps for DAC, but my god, is it just terrible to be on the receiving end of, and I would have really liked to see them rather make some changes, although small ones since it is a hotfix, to either the Battlefield Espionage battle group or the detector units that they introduced last patch. A lot of the detector units in this game are just so flimsy, and, you know, getting something like a Jeep late game just to spot things with the very short detector range. It's something like 25 if I recall it correctly at the top of my mind. And 25 is not enough. Small arms range is 35, and with snares, you know, being essentially CoH3 snares now, means you can't really use those units as a detector without losing the unit. A lot of units that arguably should have detectors, such as the Australian Light Infantry, you know, it's a recon squad, don't have it, and I find that very odd. So what I would do is basically either give these an increased detector range or introduce more detector units into the game, such as the Australian Light Infantry. I've also heard, you know, a lot of players defending this type of gameplay, mention that you should be using flares, etc. But a lot of those abilities actually have very long cooldown for what it is. And you can't really, you know, say you pop a flare on your DAC opponent's position, you know, again, it's guessing work, right? If you pop a flare and he's not there, then, you know, you wasted your flare. But say you do hit your opponent, all he does is backs out of the flare and then he immediately cloaks, and then you're stuck in the very same position again. And a lot of this, I think, comes down to the fact that the flares have a very long cooldown, but they have to have very long cooldown because they are free. And what I think is basically, you know, being a bit of a phantom here is the fact that a lot of the free abilities, the way they've balanced them, is that they have long cooldowns. And I think this experiment with free abilities is a massive issue across the board. Like we saw last patch, they finally added munition costs to vehicle smokes. Such as from the DAC Armory or from Wehrmacht's mechanized battle group. But a lot of these other abilities should arguably also have a munition cost. That way you can bring down their cooldowns so they actually become viable counters to this. So one thing they could have done is, you know, add a tiny little munition cost to flares, something like 10 munitions, and then bring down the cooldown. Same for a lot of the other abilities in the game, like the sprint of the MP40 Grenadiers, which you can basically just apply in every single engagement as soon as you get off cooldown. It should probably have a munition cost instead. That way it becomes a lot more strategic when you use it, and if you do use it, you will also slow down other upgrades. That's also one issue I feel like with the readability of a lot of the free abilities. There is no logic as to whether or not they are free. A lot of the Vet 1 abilities in the game are free on units, but a lot of them aren't, and there is no like UI difference. There's no like little icon or something on the ability. Without hovering, you would not know that the ability is free. So even me, who plays this game a shit ton, I have hundreds of hours, I have not memorized every single ability in the game, their costs, and you know, how is a new player going to, you know, find out the logic to it? Because there is no logic, it's just a memory game. You have to remember whether or not your ability is free, unless you hover over them before using each time. And this is something they really should have thought of before, you know, introducing these free abilities as a mechanic. They really could have just added a small little icon or something, you know, showing that it's free, and maybe even having like a small little dot or something showing when their free ability is ready. That way you could, you know, min-max its usage. It makes me think of games such as League of Legends, where, you know, you have auto casting and stuff like that on free abilities. They really could have done so much more here with this. But you know, in the terms of a hotfix, I really just think they should add munition cost to these and bring down the cooldowns until they figure out a system that's actually clean and consistent and makes sense for new and elite players alike. Because currently, you know, a lot of these abilities, you know, some of the howitzer or the HE shells from light vehicles such as the M3, they are free, and then you have the Hellcat, which costs munitions. There is just no logic to them. But yeah, let me know what you think of the planned changes in the comments, and of course let Relic know what you think in their official Company of Heroes Discord. Yeah, really excited that they're finally, you know, becoming more transparent here with the balance changes, and willing to discuss them before they implement. I think that's really cool. So yeah, thank you for watching.